I don't want to say a lot of things because I don't think Anne-Barbara needs a big introduction, but I just want to make a couple of linkages here. At the Inclusive Leadership Institute, our mission is to explore different facets of inclusive leadership and what that means. And when we really think about this, at the core of leadership is decision-making. And when Anne-Barbara talks about, and you see this on the cover slide, the practice of intentional decision-making, this is, and that's what Judge Softly actually means, then it is very much core of what it means to also lead inclusively. And so I am really excited to participate, to listen, to host this session on Judging Softly or Judge Softly by Anne-Barbara Lemmens. Thank you for joining us today, Anne-Barbara.
Thank you so much, Jörg, for giving me this opportunity to talk about judging and getting featured in this Inclusive Leadership Institute spotlight. Before I start, I'm going to talk about judgments today, or judging softly, and you might have a bit of a negative connotation about judgments, right? It might be negative, it feels negative. So if you have that, maybe you can just change the word to thoughts, or you can change it to automatic response, or you can even change it to a survival technique instead. So let me first introduce myself. I'm Anne-Barbara Lemmens, and I am who I am based on all the life experiences I had in my life so far. I will just go through some of them. I'm a woman. I'm a wife, happily married with my husband for over 11 years right now. I'm a mother of 3 amazing kids. I am a daughter of my mom and dad, who are also still happily married, and I grew up with and learned a lot from. I am a sister of my brother, who's 5 years older, and I grew up with as well. I am a friend of many people around the world. I am a writer of the book Judge Softly, From Tunnel Vision to Wisdom, in which I share my path toward judging softly. And it actually states about how I got fascinated by judgments, what judgments do, what the consequences are, and the path towards becoming conscious about judgments. And I will talk a little bit more about that later, of course, in this presentation. I'm a colleague of people who bring consciousness to the business environment. I was a colleague of people at Deloitte, where I worked for many, many years in both New York and in Amsterdam. And I worked on mergers, integrations, carve-outs, transformations. I was also a colleague of people at TNT Express, FedEx, and of Philips, where I helped on transforming the companies. I was a business partner of Anju, with whom I actually set up a company, Vermilion Talent, to help women get back in the workforce after a break to take care of their kids. I am a human being like you are. And I think, I communicate, and I do that all based on the life experiences I had in my life so far. So today I'm going to give you some more background about judging, that we all do, and it's universal, and we cannot not do. Let me make that statement in advance, or in the beginning of this presentation. We have 40,000 thoughts a day, and in each and every thought, there is a judgment. There's a judgment about if we find something right or if we find something wrong. So why do I feel so urgent about talking about, and so why am I so fascinated about these judgments, this topic? Well, we live in a very fast-changing environment. And in this fast-changing environment, we actually realize, or we get to see, that we find it very hard to keep connected with each other. We see a lot of retention issues with companies. We find it hard to keep people in our company. We find it hard to attract people. We find it hard to really talk with our colleagues. So we find it just hard to connect with each other. And the funny thing is, that's actually one of our basic needs of human beings. If you get to know what your judgments are and how it impacts your life, you'll be able to understand your intrinsic operating system. You'll be able to understand how you react in certain ways and why. You understand why your behavior, your mood, your automatic reactions might change in a fast changing environment. And even when you need to make tough decisions in this fast changing environment. So this way you will be able to go from stress that's there, it's hard, it's difficult, to more inspirational. You will be able to go from a tunnel vision, and I will get back to that later, to a more broader playing field. You will go from individualistic to a more effective connection, like I just mentioned. And you go from subconscious to really intentional decision-making and wisdom. So the agenda for today, I want to talk with you about what is actually a judgment. I also want to talk with you about what does it do? What are the consequences of our judgments? And then what can we do about it? Because I just mentioned, right, we all do it and we cannot not do. So what can we do about it? Before I do that, I actually want to do a quick exercise with you. I want to ask you to stand up. Well, I'm standing. Maybe you stand up or you just sit on a chair. But the most important thing is just to stand up or sit straight up. So try to straighten your back, like there's a little string on your head. So put your head straight and try to have both feet on the ground, if you're sitting or if you're standing. And if you are comfortable with it, you can actually close your eyes. If not, you can just stare at a point on the wall or a point on the floor, but just try to take your eyes off the screen for a sec. So when you're standing or sitting like this, try to focus just for a sec on your breathing. And maybe that's really hard. Maybe you don't really know where you feel it well, but you can try to find this, maybe the air going through your nostrils or your belly that's rising and falling. Or just try to see where you feel your breathing. And while you're doing this, I'm pretty sure that you've had many thoughts already by this time. Like, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? I thought I was attending a presentation about judgments. Or maybe you're thinking about what else you want to do today. Those thoughts come and go and you can't really stop them. So now what I'd like you to do, keep your eyes closed and just be in the same, like straighten back and try to visualize something, imagine something. Imagine you're sitting at your desk and you're working. And 3 days ago, you had been really, really working hard to meet a deadline of a client. So 3 nights ago, you send out this deliverable to a client. And you were there, you met the deadline. You worked really hard with your team, by yourself, and you finally were there. You were able to send it out. And it was a relief. It's 3 days later now, and you haven't heard anything from the client yet. No phone call, no confirmation email, no email, nothing. So imagine now that you're sitting there and just see what kind of thoughts are popping up in your mind. Really see yourself sitting there. You worked really hard. You didn't hear anything back from the client. Just see what thoughts pop up. And maybe you have follow-up thoughts on the first initial thought. Maybe you get all thoughts in your head and just let them go. Let them be there, and just look at them. So when you're ready, you can open your eyes again and just see how it is to transition back to the room and to transition to put your eyes on the screen again. And I'm just going to go through some thoughts that you might have had. Maybe you thought you were very frustrated about the client. Why didn't the client come back to me with at least a confirmation email? You get a little bit irritated about the client. Maybe that was a thought that popped up. Maybe you started to doubt about the email that you send out. Like, oh, maybe I didn't send the right email. Maybe I didn't attach the document. Maybe the content wasn't right. Maybe I'm not skilled enough to serve this client. Or maybe this colleague did something wrong. Another thought could be, well, okay, maybe the client just needs some more time to look at it. Or maybe your thoughts were about my accent, right? Well, I actually run you through this exercise, and it didn't really, the thought wasn't really about the visualization. Either way, what happened was that you subconsciously judged. You judged about the client, you judged yourself, you judged your colleague, you judged maybe the email system, you judged about me. And so that illustrates that everybody thinks based on their own assumptions, their own expectations, their own beliefs. So before I continue, I would like to share another thing. It's a quote from David Foster Wallace. He's an American writer and essayist. And he started one of his speeches like this. There are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" I like this quote or this little story so much because it's actually exactly where we're in. We don't even know that we judge. We're in the middle. It's like water for fishes. It reflects how we all live our lives. We have no clue that we judge, and judgments, funny thing is, impacts everything that we do, every interaction that we have, every decision that we make, every reaction, every mood, behavior, etc. So this leads all interactions that we have with people. So we do what with the judgment that we have that is subconsciously there, we make a decision if something is right or wrong. And right or wrong can be like the overarching names, but it can also be if it's suitable or not, or if it should be like that or not. Just keep right or wrong for now. And that's how I come to the definition of what a judgment is, in my view. And that is a judgment is every subconscious reaction in any situation. We judge every time when we are in a new situation. So I realized when I did a lot of research for my book that I wrote, and when I am working with clients, that it is pretty hard to actually notice, to become aware of the judgments that we have. So what I try to do is make a picture of what the judgments with, just some categories of judgments that we have. And I will show you that here. So you will see it's this iceberg. Probably most of you know the iceberg of Freud, right? Where we have the conscious thoughts on top of the surface, and we have the subconscious thoughts below the surface. So the more conscious judgments that we have is where we have sentences that we start with "I find" or "I think." We sort of consciously say an opinion or tell an opinion to people. It's also when we use adjectives. I find it always a hard word to say, adjectives. It's when we say, "Oh, this ugly sweater," right? We also sort of consciously know that we say something about a situation, a person, an object. But let's now talk about the more unconscious judgments. And I hear you think unconscious bias, right? That is what most of us probably already did a program about. Where does that belong? Well, I think that belongs sort of in the middle, like almost on top or below. We all know sort of that we need to be aware of it. We know that we need to be very conscious when we talk with people from different backgrounds, people with different accents. Well, I can go on. So we are sort of know, and we also sort of know that we should be conscious and that we should act in a certain way. Those are not per se the judgments that I want to talk about. The judgments that I want to talk about is you can sort of put them in three categories. one of the judgments that we have is all the judgments that we base on the basic need of us, everybody of us, to be part of a group. We all want to be part of a group. We want to belong. That is actually one of our basic needs to survive. Then we have judgments that we all base on our own beliefs, our own assumptions, our own expectations, predictions. Maybe you've heard the word concepts before, that we all put together, like we have our own unique set based on our life experiences. That's why I shared also my background. I have my unique life experiences, and so have you as well. And then we have judgments about others that link back to our own self-image. And of course, that also has to do with the beliefs and assumptions that we collected during our lives. And the self-image is really, that we collected based on the defense mechanisms that we put up for ourselves. So all of these things result in thoughts and behaviors that I give you some examples about. It's those little voices in your head or thoughts that you have in your head where you say, I must do this, or you must do this, or you should do this. It is a judgment about either yourself, that you don't really find it good enough what you're doing right now, or you have a judgment about somebody else. Or this thought about, if I only finish this project, or if I only make this revenue, then I will make promotion, right? It's the if-then thought that we have really, believe me, we have it a lot, but maybe we're not aware of it. Then the one, maybe you recognize this one as well. If I only had said this, then we won this project. It's when we are really very busy with the past. And then a very important one that for me was really an eye-opener when I did research and when I wrote in my book is about ranking. So every time when we meet a new person, but also somebody we already know even, we rank. What we do, we put ourselves above this person or below this person. And we do that based on anything. It's not only about title, expertise, about salary, but it is really about everything, even about the gadgets that somebody has, or about the clothing that somebody is wearing, or about the certain brand of glasses that somebody is wearing. So it's really, really broad. And we do this every time we meet somebody. And this is really, I see this also when I work with clients, an enormous eye-opener, because you actually go in a conversation in a different way if you put yourself below somebody, or if you put yourself above somebody. You feel much more a need to prove yourself when you find yourself below somebody. So these are just examples, or this is just the categories of judgments that we talk about. So when do we mostly judge? Well, I just already mentioned about this fast changing environment that we're in, and there's so much going on in the world. If we just can stay in our known world, where we know how everything will go, where our beliefs and assumptions are met every time, when we know who is saying what, then we will not judge that much. But that's sort of an utopia, right? We cannot live in a world where everything is known. So as soon as we get more unknown and uncertainties about things, then we will judge much more. What we try to do, we want to stay in the known. We resist the unknown because we find it very scary. We're actually living in a little bit of fear by then, because we don't know what's going on. We don't know what's going to happen. It's uncontrollable. So this is also illustrates that because we're in fast changing environment, and we constantly actually are in change, and it's not only in the world, it's also in your organization, it's also at home, it's with COVID, it's with everything. I can mention everything that's going on in the world. We are judging much more, and we are getting stuck more and more in the resistance. We don't want to get to the unknown, and we get stuck more and more into a tunnel vision. And just a tunnel vision of, no, I want to live like this, and I don't want to see everything like that. So why are we doing that? We're doing that because historically it really helped us to judge, right? You probably know the story about when, like really a long time ago, somebody needed to run literally for a tiger that might eat him alive or her alive. And on top of that, as a child, you actually bring up defense mechanisms. You learn how to condition yourself to survive in an environment where you live in. So we learn to judge almost. But now think about the environment where we live in right now. First of all, we don't need to be afraid that if a colleague or a client approaches us, that he or she will eat us alive. And second of all, we can actually let go of the defense mechanisms that we build up as a child, right? We're grown up now. We know who we are, if we know who we are. And that's exactly sort of the urge for me to know what your judgments are and to know how you look at the world. Because it's almost, you miss so much if you live in that fear, in that defense mechanism. So what happens when we judge? Well, I can be very, very brief about that. What happens is that we get stress. So we have a judgment, we stress. We have stress and we have a judgment, and it goes on and on. Think about it. When you have a judgment, and maybe we go back to the exercise that we did, and maybe you had the thought about the client, right? You were frustrated about the client. Immediately, and maybe you even felt it in the exercise, but you get tension in your body and you feel stress and you feel it's negative energy. You feel frustrated, your emotion is stress. So I put stress as in a broad sense. And then when you have stress, you get to that, you're in that uncertain situation, right? So you judge again, and then you go again and you go again, and you can actually go downhill from there. And we all know by now as well, and we know that there's a lot of this going on, that if we're constantly in stress, that we cannot deal with that. We cannot think clear anymore. We don't have any headspace, and we cannot make decisions with enough headspace. We're not able to see that bigger picture, and we get stuck even more in the tunnel vision than we were already. And at some point we will get burned out. And that all happens with this tunnel vision. So what I also found very interesting to really dig deep into, and I got a lot of knowledge about, is what happens really actually when we judge, because we can actually put some steps into that. And this is all what's happening. This circle, I call it the judgment circle, really happens in like not even a second. So that's why it's also really hard to become aware of the fact and notice all these steps, because it goes so quick. This is really our automatic response that we use constantly. So I will just go through it briefly. We have a situation, it starts there with a certain circumstance. And the circumstances actually have a huge impact on how we see a situation, right? It can even, I also wrote about it before, about rain. A rainy day, you are totally in a different situation than when there is a sunny day. But it can be bigger, and it's anything, maybe you didn't have a good night's sleep, etc. What we do when we're in a situation, we put an experience from the past. So from your unique set of experiences, you put that on that situation, like, oh, I've seen this before, and you use the context of that experience that you had before on top of that situation. And maybe it doesn't even, it's not the same, but still you're doing that quickly because you want to stay in the known. And what happens then, you actually continue. So the consequence is that you have the same thoughts as you had in that experience for this new situation. So you have the assumptions already ready, you have your beliefs ready, your expectations, and that's it, right? That's how you deal with a new situation. Based on that, you get an emotion. You get already frustrated because, well, when we talk about this client exercise, you get frustrated because, oh my gosh, the last experience I had with the client, they didn't come back, and I know that they probably will not, we will not win this project. So this emotion comes immediately after that. You get frustrated, sad, angry. Can also be a positive emotion, right? If you feel like, okay, the client probably needs some more time, that can also be. Can also be a positive judgment. But still, you're getting yourself into a tunnel vision. And then out of this emotion, you express your judgment. And expressing your judgment can be non-verbal or verbal. and be aware of the fact that non-verbal is actually, we do that more often, and it's really, most of the time we might think that people don't see it, but yeah, people see that. So when you express your judgment about this situation, then a new situation comes in, and then we go again through this circle. So, well, like I said, 40,000 thoughts a day, 40,000 times going through this circle. And then think about when you're in a meeting and you have all your colleagues having these circles on top of them, going like this and seeing things and then responding to it or having assumption about it, or what a chaos it actually is, what a mess it is when we are all getting into these circles. So what I try to do with judging softly is also to put some structure in this chaos, to put some openness in this chaos. Like, okay, we're all doing this, we're all having this, and even sometimes a little bit of humor. Let's laugh, let's be able to laugh about what we're doing, of the absurdity, right, of what we're doing as human beings. So we can actually do something about this, which is great. And that is what I developed for this as a Judge Softly method. What we can do, and thank God for neuroplasticity, is that we can actually override some automatic reactions and override what we're doing in our brains by practicing a lot. The first thing you need to do is to become aware of the fact that you're doing it. Otherwise, you can't really override. But then how I'm doing this with teams, with individuals, with clients, is that we put some consciousness in any of these steps to be aware of the fact that you are putting an experience on a situation and that your thought is immediately following that and this emotion, right? Maybe you can look at your emotion and think back, maybe this emotion is not really needed at this point. So in any of the steps, you can put consciousness in there. And when you become conscious, you can actually start working with every time when the circle starts, every time when you can actually, oh, okay, let me think about this. Is this really true, or what am I doing? Is this right what I'm doing now? So let me also be very clear about judging softly. It's not because it seems now, okay, then I need to become conscious and that takes a lot of time. It's not about slowing down. It's also not about not making decisions. It's not about becoming weak or vulnerable. No, it's actually, it means leadership, inclusive leadership. It means authenticity. It means that you get power and you're able to rely on your intuition. You get self-awareness. You know how you look at the world. And that way you can also really communicate instead of out of tunnel vision. You're able to connect. And I think that's a really important one. Also to make decisions. You need to be connected with each other to make a decision. And you are able to be effective and efficient. So you're able to pause, to look at the circle, to look if it makes sense at this moment in time, and then make a choice. Maybe you follow your judgment at that point. That's fine as well. But then at least you make a conscious choice and a conscious decision, intentional decision of how you want to connect. And this way you can go from fear towards trust. You can work out of trust instead of fear. So I also want to give you a little bit of homework or like an assignment, just for fun, just to think, to keep this in mind. When you are in an interaction, maybe later today, try to see if you can become aware of the judgment that you have when somebody is talking to you. Try to see what the thoughts, or to really be aware of the thoughts that you have and what kind of judgment is behind that. And also then, if you become aware and you are able to pause and not directly express your judgment, see what it does with the interaction between you and the other person, how it changed. Just see what's happening. So I have a method here, and I actually forgot about this wisdom, which is actually really important. So what is actually the outcome of judging softly? Well, in my view, then you can actually come to the wisdom we all have in ourselves, but we need to relearn to get to that wisdom that we have. And wisdom might sound a little spiritual or like a word that you might not want to use in business environment. But wisdom is actually everything that we can bring to the table, that we can bring in companies, to wise communication, to have wise leadership and wise teaming. And especially if you go through those 6, I'm pretty sure that you actually want to have all of these things in your team or in your company going on. Because this way you can really connect to other people, to your colleagues, to your clients. So just briefly, be open to new experiences. Be able to regulate your emotions. And it doesn't mean that I don't want you to show your emotions. No, be able to see what's going on, what your emotion is, and see if it really makes sense at that point in time. Feel and practice compassion. And here again, maybe compassion sounds a little spiritual, mindfulness type thing, but compassion is really so important to have in the team. It's about compassion for yourself, and it can actually be also compassion to making a hard decision. Be pretty quick about it. Compassion really can be hard and can be soft. Be able to reflect about your judgment circle, be able to also show that you're reflecting. And recognize that life is not controllable. We always think that we can control life in many ways, but yeah, you see, right? Everything changes every day. You need to be very flexible to live. And the last one is assume good intentions. So assume that everybody, actually, the only thing that people want to be happy. They have good intentions. There's a story behind somebody and somebody's behavior and somebody's mood. So try to find out what's behind this decision. So just to summarize about Judge Softly, I have 4 phases: become aware, it's review, it's acknowledge, and then wise communication. I won't go in too much detail here, but I think the most important thing is that you go from fear to trust. So by learning how to judge softly, you can recognize your own subconscious reactions. You can actually know how you look at the world, like I mentioned, right? You know what's good for you. That also is compassion. You know when you need to stop, when you need to listen to signals. You actually see the signals. And you're aware of your and others' attentions in a broader playing field. You can go from tunnel vision to more wisdom, to a wider playing field. And then this way you can approach the unknown with an open view. So I'm very excited that I'm actually gonna offer a masterclass via Inclusive Leadership Institute, and more information will come about that. And I'm very curious to hear if there's any questions. Thank you so much for listening so far.
Well, thank you, Anne-Barbara, and that was my cue, right, to chime in with seeing what questions people are sending in, and if you haven't, there are a few questions here. I'll get to them in a moment. If you have specific questions, please use the Q&A feature or function, not the chat function that has been disabled, but please use the Q&A function, as we're getting into a little bit of a conversation about this. So I'll context one of the questions, the first question, a little bit, because I can't help myself. You know, I'm still thinking about the 40,000 thoughts in a day, you know, concept. And this is one of the reasons why I think this is a way, or what you're offering is a way beyond unconscious bias. You know, unconscious bias, especially for those that are in the diversity, equity and inclusiveness field, is obviously something, you know, that's being focused on. You know, but I think what you're doing here is you're putting unconscious bias into a context, and you're giving us a methodology for how to work with it. And I really appreciate that, because oftentimes there isn't a good techniques other than know your biases. There isn't a lot more there. And yet, why do we need to look at biases? It's because they impact our judgment, our individual judgments, our collective judgments. They're attached like little molecules to all these 40,000 thoughts. can we spot those? I mean, and most people can't. They take a test, they say, oh, I have these and these biases, and they might feel bad about it, or become very self-conscious.
Yeah.
And then oftentimes I find that people say, oh, does that mean I shouldn't be biased? And it's almost, it doesn't lead sometimes to very helpful advice. And that's what I really, really appreciate about your methodology here, because you're giving us a process. Anyway, so that's, I can't, I just want to say this, but there are a couple of questions. So one question is, how do we practice becoming more aware of our thoughts about situations and experiences? I think that referred to the first stage in your model, that initialization, actually. So how does that actually work to become more aware? I think it's a great question, actually. Let's start with that.
Thank you. Yeah, that is a great question. I will actually get back to that last slide just to show that part of the method. Yeah, becoming aware of judgments about yourself, right, about others. There's so many different categories that we judge about, and then the expression and the consequences. So what I do with clients is to become aware of judgment one is going through this circle, this judgment circle is already a huge eye-opener. And what I do then is I practice, it's really what I offer is mostly experiences, because like you said, right, unconscious bias trainings, it's really helpful, it's really needed. I think most of the companies already did one. However, you see that it doesn't stick, it doesn't stay. Maybe 1 week, maybe 2 weeks, hopefully, and then it disappears a little bit. So what I do is offer experiences, because when you experience, then you actually start to override and make the connections in your brains about what you're doing. And experiencing the experiences are I have a lot of them, but one of them is, for example, I practice with 2 colleagues who need to talk to each other. And one colleague cannot respond or cannot verbally or non-verbally respond, and just needs to listen to the other person. And I just gave a prompt, and then one colleague starts to talk. And I always do it a little bit longer than is comfortable. So like 5 minutes, it's a long time. And then you see that the person who's listening then experiences, oh, wow, I had this thought, I had this judgment. And so then you actually sort of pause, you really put something, take somebody out normal way of doing, and then you start to override, and then you understand. And I did, for example, at one client, after 4 workshops, I asked them, like, how are we gonna make sure that this sticks, right? What are you? And what they did, and I was very happy with that, like every Monday morning they have a team meeting, and what they do, because they became so open about their judgments to each other, is that they always take one person in the team can bring up one of the judgment circles that they had over the last week, and they explain their experience and what happened, and maybe people give advice to each other or coach each other about it. So it's really doing, it's really experiencing, and then by then becoming aware. And there's, of course, a lot about consciousness as well. And I am a big believer of that you can actually train consciousness as well by meditating. And that is proven, that is true, right? If you every day meditate for at least 5 minutes, there will be more consciousness in your brain. It will make connections. So that's another thing that I think is needed to become aware. Yeah.
But I love this, and I'll come to another question that came through, or it was an observation, but I'll turn it into a question. But I just want to emphasize this idea that actually you're providing a container for that reflection, because that's actually what I heard, at least if I understood you correctly, that we go through an experience, but then you're asking the person to reflect on that experience, and that reflection injects that little bit of consciousness.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a powerful practice. The second question here is actually, again, I turned the observation into a question, and this was one participant who really resonated with this idea of ranking and linking. You know,
Yeah.
the idea that we're just always ranking, right? You know, but people aren't really aware of it. And the comment was that it seems so obvious now that you point this out, but it wasn't so obvious before, right? And so I guess I don't know. Do you want to say a little more about this idea of ranking and linking and how that works and how that impacts our experiences, I guess?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's definitely, and I like the participants' comment, because I think this was also for me, one of the biggest eye-openers when I read about it and when I experienced it as well, because then now you know, and I would love for this participant to then now bring it to daily life, is now you know, just be aware of it, notice it, that it's happening, and see how it then feels when you try to link. And link just means you're on the same level, right? Just go to a conversation without any expectations, without any assumption, without any prediction, because that's what we do when we rank, right? We have certain expectations about how this conversation will be. And you bring also a certain goal or target almost to a conversation, how it should end. And if you then can let that go, so try to not have any expectations and just feel like, okay, we're having a conversation. And of course, the topic can be defined, right? That's most of the times when you meet with somebody, you have a certain topic, but you try to get rid of the assumptions. And you will see that the conversation is really, it's a huge difference. Yeah, I can't really say much more. You need to experience it again. I think that's
yes. But you know, because we have a number of people who on the line who really work in this diversity, equity, inclusiveness space. And what came up for me was this ranking is also connected. All these thought patterns was, do I feel inferior? Do I feel a little less than, or the opposite? Do I feel more than or above people? And that in itself then sets in motion this cycle and repeated cycles of thoughts and patterns, and really can put us into a very negative cycle, right? I mean, around performance, about how I show up, and confidence or lack of confidence. And I'm just linking this to our Vince Varallo's spotlight session just around accent, right? And you brought up if you're self-conscious, so think about all these tunes and double takes that we make, and we can really lower our self-confidence and our self-esteem by going through that cycle a few times.
Yeah, and I would love to add to that and this is really relates also to the topic psychological safety, right? That's really hot right now, and that a lot of people, especially in HR, really want to do something with that topic. Well, this is one of the things that you can do, or that you can work with. Because in psychological safety, if there's no safety, then right, people rank themselves under some, dare almost to speak up, or they don't dare to bring up a new idea. And how that's really a shame almost, right? That people cannot bring up their ideas, and they actually might have there's I think that topic, especially if you're in inclusiveness, this is really an important thing to mention and to work with.
So, and I love this example you gave, because it seems to me that even if I work in a team and I work with this wheel or this cycle, and I make my own thought processes explicit, that actually can create a lot of psychological safety if this becomes a routine, and it doesn't even have to take that much time. But I'm attaching another question that came through here. How do you work with teams or with groups around this? Because I think the participants said they can see how this works individually, but how do you actually work that with teams or with groups?
Yeah, yeah. Because it's such a basis of communication, I work in many, many different ways. So I can't say I only do this, although judgments seem very much like a niche, right? But it is actually very broad. It's a basis of communication. It's a basis of connection, leadership. So I get in for many different, a variety of questions. And what I always do always is, okay, there is a question or an issue, but let me now first talk to a lot of people within the organization to really understand what the issue is, because most of the times the issue is different than maybe one person came up with. But that being said, there's a lot like a culture, right? Culture is in the end also how do we connect with each other and how do we deal with each other? What are our values? So strategy sessions as well. I work with clients on when they actually, before they have like a strategy session, to first talk about this topic. And I've seen with clients that then all of a sudden this strategy session was so much more effective and efficient because they were so open about what their thoughts were. And they didn't feel like, oh, we can't really say that, or I should say it in this way. No, really say, and then you get value.
Yes.
Psychological safety, like I said, it's also evaluations. I now also work with a client, with two clients of one company who are in a conflict. So I try to help them to solve this conflict in a really respectful way. And also here, we just go through this judgment circle and, oh, I didn't know you were thinking like that, right? And then the other person, so yeah, so there's many different ways I work with clients, and that makes it so interesting because
Sure.
it's a huge basis for a lot of questions that companies have.
And actually, sometimes companies do these, let's share our individual stories, and they do this once, and then it stays there. Oh, my devices are going off. I don't know why. But and then we leave it there. But it seems to me that when we do this consistently, we actually get to know each other really well, and in a way that matters over time, and even a little more over time. Yeah. Here is a great question. How does one make one's boss avoid prejudging in discussions based on biases arising out of, let's say, incorrect hearsay? One of the participants sent that question in. I think this comes from a lot of experience, I guess.
Yeah. I think so as well. Well, the funny thing is I also worked with a client where this person was difficult for this person to work with the boss. The boss had this as well, like judgment. And the funny thing is that as soon as you are already putting this out, right, you feel like your boss is having prejudgments. It means that you actually already judge this boss. So you already have a certain assumption about this boss. So just to turn it around, let's try for this person. And I know it's really hard, and I know it's not easy, but yeah, sometimes we need to get through the unease to actually get to a better relationship. It's really to go in a meeting with this boss, and maybe you want to say something about it without any assumptions and expectations. And what happened to the client I worked with was that this boss didn't really have these prejudgments, but the person who thought he had it made it a big deal. So when you open it up, when you actually go in a meeting and say, there's no assumptions, this is what I observe, I really want to talk to you about this, right? Open it up. And then you will see that there can be a conversation. And this also links back to the good intention, right? The boss probably has an intention, a good intention, or probably, I know every person has a good intention of what they do. There is a good intention behind it. So what's the story behind this behavior? Let's try to get to that, right? So let's try to talk to this boss about this. And maybe you don't want to make it as specific already, like saying, hey, I see you judge. No, maybe you just try to get that story behind first and ask questions and really listen.
Yeah,
I
it
hope
gets
it's
complicated.
not.
All these
Yeah,
layers and layers of that.
that's the thing.
Um,
Yeah.
I'm looking at our time, so we have time for one more question, but and that's I think that's a very interesting one. Namely, we seem to be focused a little bit on maybe negative judgments, even though you've talked a little bit about positive judgments, but does the same apply to positive judgments? And is there a difference between applying it to those negative judgments or, let's say, positive judgments?
Yeah, that's a good one as well, because yeah, when I do this presentation, I hear that every time, like, yeah, but what about positive ones, right? So the positive ones, you would think, well, it's okay, right? And I'm happy. My emotion is then happiness, and I actually express a judgment that is very, well, maybe good for the other person. However, I think you go through this same sort of vision of tunnel vision, right? You still see maybe not everything that's out there. Maybe you can be even more happy, right? Or you can be even, so the positive judgment feels less needed or urged. There's less urge to do something about it, but also keep in mind there that you keep yourself in this illusionary world, right? You keep yourself in this circle. So there are still assumptions that you put yourself on there, and maybe those assumptions are not really true. So with positive judgment is almost more scary, right? Because you keep yourself in this because it's fine. You feel okay, but still you miss a lot of things. So I think there's not really a difference. I think it's only really hard for us as human beings to do something with those, because there's not really an urge to do something about that.
Yeah, we don't see the need, but the need might be just as big, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. So, I know we're at time, but I mean, this is a huge topic, and I'm so happy that you're not only offering here a methodology and a framework for helping individuals and organizations, be better at judging, because that's what we do, as you said, and not creating the impression that judgment is by nature bad, right? I mean, that's I think what a lot of people carry. But I mean, applying this methodology makes us better leaders. It makes us better in teams. For all the benefits, psychological safety, or just getting to a greater level of trust, as you talked about. It helps us make better, more intentional decisions, and ultimately probably create better outcomes, or at least outcomes that are aligned with our intentions and our value systems. And I think that's as good as it can get. So I really appreciate you spending time with us today to just explore this a little bit. And of course, I'm extremely excited about the master classes that you'll be creating for the Inclusive Leadership Institute. But even just this presentation, I think, helps people get on a path and maybe become a little more conscious. And this is phenomenal.
Yeah,
so thank you so much, Barbara.
Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for everybody who dialed in. We hope to get some feedback from you and hear from you about this and our upcoming spotlight sessions as well. So thank you.
Bye-bye.